At 5:40 every morning, Elena folds a blue nursing uniform into a red backpack. She has not worked a hospital shift in 11 months. Still, she smooths every crease. She checks the name badge. She keeps a pair of clean shoes in a plastic bag. Then she leaves the overnight shelter before the lights come on. People who pass her on the sidewalk do not know she once held a newborn child while a frightened father learned how to breathe again. They do not know she can read a monitor before it starts to alarm. They do not know that, for 20 years, Elena was the person families remembered when they said thank you through tears. They see a red backpack. They see someone moving too slowly in the early morning. They see what they expect to see. But a backpack can carry more than what a person owns. Sometimes, it carries the version of a person they are trying not to lose. This is Elena's invisible chapter. Before the shelter, before the interviews, before every public library became a place to charge a phone and print one more resume, there was a small apartment above a bakery. It was not beautiful in the way people show beauty online. The kitchen light flickered. The windows rattled in winter. The hallway smelled like bread before dawn. But it was home. Her mother, Rosa, lived there with her. Elena worked nights at a rehabilitation hospital. Rosa kept basil in a chipped blue pot by the window. On Sundays, they made soup and argued gently about whether Elena worked too much. Elena thought she understood exhaustion. She worked 12-hour shifts. She knew the weight of a sleeping patient who needed help turning over. She knew how a fluorescent hospital corridor could make midnight feel like morning and morning feel like another midnight. Then Rosa got sick. At first, it was small things. A missed appointment, a fall in the bathroom, a sentence that began clearly and ended somewhere else. Elena used every day off, then every favor, then every hour she could trade. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she could hold both worlds together, the job that paid the rent and the mother who needed her. For a while she did. Then the calls started coming during shifts. A neighbor saying Rosa had left the stove on. A doctor saying the medication had changed. A caseworker explaining forms that Elena read 3 times and still could not understand. She began arriving late, not because she did not care, because a bus had not come, because her mother was frightened, because no one can be in 2 urgent rooms at once. Her supervisor tried to help. There were conversations. There was unpaid leave. There was a promise to call when Elena was ready. But rent does not pause for a promise. The savings disappeared quietly. First the emergency fund, then the credit card, then the money she had set aside for a used car that was never going to happen. Elena became very good at moving numbers around on a piece of paper. If she paid the electric bill late, she could buy another week of medication. If she paid only the minimum, she could keep the phone on. If she skipped meals at work, she could make the grocery bag last longer. None of those choices looked reckless by themselves. That is how a crisis often works. It does not always arrive as one terrible decision. Sometimes it arrives as 100 reasonable decisions that all cost more than you have. Rosa died on a Thursday afternoon in March. Elena remembers the chair beside the bed, the paper cup of cold coffee, her mother's hand, suddenly so light. She remembers a nurse she did not know brushing hair away from Rosa's forehead with the kind of care Elena had given strangers for years. After the funeral, the apartment became too quiet. The basil plant browned. The bakery downstairs still opened before sunrise. The rent notice still came on time. Elena thought returning to work would save her, but grief had changed her sleep. She woke at 3 in the morning, certain she had missed a call. At the hospital, she stood in a supply room and could not remember why she had gone there. She was not dangerous. She was not careless. She was simply empty. When her leave ended, the position was gone. The letter was polite. It said the hospital valued her service. It said she was welcome to apply again. It said nothing cruel. It did not have to. 3 months later, the eviction notice appeared under the door. Elena read it sitting on the kitchen floor. She read it once, then again. The red backpack was beside her, already packed with documents, medication, a sweater, and the blue uniform she could not throw away. On the last morning, she carried one box downstairs, then another. A neighbor offered to store a photo album. The landlord waited at the end of the hallway, embarrassed and silent. Elena did not blame him. She did not have enough energy left to blame anyone. When the door closed, she stood outside for a long time with the key in her hand. The first night without a home was not dramatic. That is one of the lies people believe. There was no music, no single moment when the world announced what had happened. There was only a bus station, a charging outlet near a vending machine, a red backpack under her arm because she was afraid to let it go. In the beginning, Elena said she was between places. Then she said she was staying with a friend. Then she stopped answering questions that could not change the answer. She learned the schedule of public bathrooms. She learned which library staff would let her sit near an outlet without asking why. She learned that a shower can feel like a job interview when you have 30 minutes and nowhere private to dry your hair. And every morning, she folded the uniform. It was not denial, it was evidence. The blue fabric reminded her that she had skills, that her hands knew what to do, that she was more than the address printed on an old application. One afternoon, at the library, she saw a flyer for a free health clinic. The word volunteer was written in large letters. Elena stared at it for almost 10 minutes. She did not call that day, or the next. When you have lost enough, even a small door can feel too heavy to open. You start believing every opportunity is a test you are already failing. But on Friday, she called. The clinic coordinator was named Jonah. He asked about her experience. Elena began with, "I used to be a nurse." Jonah stopped her. He said, "If you are licensed, you are a nurse." It was a small correction, but sometimes dignity returns in small measurements. The clinic could not offer a job, not yet. It could offer 2 volunteer shifts a week, a meal, and access to a case manager. Elena almost said no. She needed money, not another unpaid obligation. Then she remembered the uniform. On her first morning, she changed in a library restroom. She tied her hair back. She placed the name badge above her heart. When she walked through the clinic door, the receptionist looked up and said, "Good morning, Elena." Not ma'am, not homeless woman, not someone waiting for a seat near a wall outlet. Elena. The work came back slowly, a blood pressure cuff, a frightened child, a patient who did not want to admit that he could not afford his medication. Elena did not fix every problem. She listened. She explained. She made calls. She made the room a little less frightening. At the end of the shift, Jonah handed her a sandwich and a list of housing resources. Elena put both in the red backpack. There were still bad days. A shelter bed was not guaranteed. A job application could vanish into silence. The case manager's list had waiting lists inside waiting lists. Elena sometimes looked at the rent prices online and felt the old panic rise in her chest. Recovery was not a staircase. It was a map with missing streets. But the clinic gave her references. The case manager helped replace documents. A former colleague returned an email, then another. Elena was offered a part-time position at a long-term care center. The pay was not enough to solve everything. The hours were not ideal. The first paycheck disappeared into transportation, food, and a deposit for a shared room. Still, it was a paycheck. The room was in a house with 3 other women. The window faced a brick wall. The mattress was thin, but there was a door that locked from the inside and a shelf where Elena placed the blue uniform, folded for the next morning. She kept the red backpack too. Not because she expected to need it again, because she wanted to remember what it carried. A toothbrush, a resume, a sandwich, a list of phone numbers, a name badge, evidence that a person can be exhausted and still be capable, afraid and still be kind, unhoused and still belong to the future. Homelessness is not a personality. It is not a moral verdict. It is not the entire story of anyone you pass on the street. Sometimes it is an illness in the family, a job that disappears, a rent increase, a grief that arrives faster than help. Sometimes it is a red backpack holding the last proof that someone has not given up. Elena did not become a different person when she found a room. She was the same nurse she had always been. The difference was that someone finally saw her as one. If this story stays with you, let it change the question you ask when you see someone carrying everything they own. Not what happened to them. Ask instead, what do they still carry? Because every life has chapters no one can see. And no chapter should be the last one.